Let's go.
We are now going to, well, I'm just going to say the name of the panel is No One is in Charge, Now What? And I feel like the way this started sort of felt like that, so this is good. Our next speaker is an exponential technologies advisor, alumna of Singularity University, founder of d.Cent Labs, and an ExO Works consultant. She was recognized as one of the top 10 frontier women in blockchain and digital assets by the UN Fifth Element Group, and is a mentor and advisor to AI, blockchain, and biohealthcare companies at SU Ventures, SU Smart City Accelerator, and the CLSI and GSV Labs. Please give a warm welcome to Anitha Vadavatha.
Hi. Did you all have enough coffee? Or I'm pretty loud anyway, but just want to make sure that you're awake. Again, thanks for having me here, KP and the rest of the amazing crew at Shadow Ventures. And I'm really honored to be able to kind of share some of my thoughts, really not so much on the application, industry, companies. I'm sure you're getting plenty of that, and you're yourself great experts in that field. But I just want to give a little more of a slightly meta or tangential perspective as to why no one could be in charge and what does it really mean for us as an individual, as an entity, or actually as a community or as a city. So essentially, what I'm really saying is in the future, or the current scenario and the future scenarios, and the current situation, the future situation, really it belongs to the ones who are thinking decentralization first, not as an outcome, or automation as the first choice of strategy, not as probably a secondary or third option. And intelligent, I think it kind of goes without saying that intelligence has to be built into every kind of decision making that's going to go around. And of course, connected. I think the last one is the most important one, because if there's not deeper integration and deeper connection, what does it really mean for the rest of us working and trying to change things in the industry? But before that, I just want you guys to kind of watch this really, really short clip. Hopefully the video is not gonna hang.
Here's a quote. In the past century, there were more changes than in the previous 1,000 years.
The rate of change is explosive to the point that our ability to understand the implications of it is going to be out of our grasp very soon.
Our intuition about the future is linear, not exponential. It makes a huge difference.
The impact of these things is completely unpredictable.
We can't know what the future is going to be, but we influence the future.
I had sort of a very simple metric now I use, which is, are you working on something that can change the world? Yes or no? The answer for 99.99999% of people in the world is no.
What if?
It's a pretty long trailer, but I think the key point there is, and I'm going to share you the link, exponential, linear. We talk about linear all the time. Linear graphs, linear growth, year on year. How does industry verticals compare? What's the linearity? We think and live in linear terms. Like we are born, go to college, date, find a respective spouse or partner, have children. It's a cycle of life. But we also operate our businesses in the same direction. It's like there's an idea, there's a problem, we build things, and then we start putting these things together in a way where we start measuring them. Intrinsically built into every model that we deal with it is on a linear curve, right? But what is exponential? I think the most important term here is, what if we are pretty much kind of going into an environment of nonlinear? And what does nonlinear mean? Is it upside down, sideways? Is it an upward curve or a downward curve? Is it an S curve? Like, really, how do you build models like that? How do you build industries that actually are going to be driving exponentiality, not linearity-based models? So can I predict that this year, if I made 10% in return, even if we take the best case scenario, can I literally come back and make a statement as an analyst in a public hearing call saying that, hey, by the way, next year we're going to have 10,000% return? Everyone's going to just laugh at that. But we've actually had enough anecdotes to prove that exponential environments actually have much harder metric to measure based on linear curves. So kind of going back to that, I want to really start off with something more fundamental. Trust. I know we hear a lot about trust. There's a very, very interesting study that is being put together by Edelman Group. I'm sure a lot of you already know they have a big presence in Atlanta. They started studying trust, really. What does trust mean, and why is trust important? Especially, why is trust important for industries to consider? Why is trust important for companies to consider? Because ultimately, it all affects your consumers, and then how consumers actually behave with these entities. So if you actually look at this really interesting graph, of course, we're looking at since 2001 till about like last year. If either way you look at it, each year when they were actually tracking, and of course there are a bunch of variables what they're actually looking at, trust seems to be shifting around. Either there's trust one year completely in the government side of things, but people don't believe in the private entity. Or next year, it's actually they believe only in private corporations to solve problems, but they don't care about the government. But then suddenly the trust shifted towards, hey, no, only cause-oriented organizations like nonprofits are fantastic because everyone else, I don't know what they're doing with it. They're going to just screw me. I'm not interested in that. But then suddenly it shifted towards media. We started believing that, hey, media is the ultimate truth teller, and I'm going to not going to trust anybody else. I'm going to rely on media. But either way, there is this volatility in trust and how it is shifting between all these different entities. Because with any business can't stand on its own without the media component, the governance component, the government's involvement, and some of the policies they put in place for the business to succeed, or the private opportunities and the entrepreneurs building that. So what's really interesting is after all of that moving around, starting 2017, it became to a point of a crisis. So people said, I don't believe in anything. Like, I don't believe in media, I don't believe in corporations. I think everyone's out to get their own interests. No one really cares about the broader good of the world. So we're basically in 2018 and now what we call the battle of truth. So, but what is truth? So for the first time, we are looking at trust on a major decline, not on an incline. At the same time, if you actually look at this polarization of trust chart here, what's interesting is, out of the 16 countries that were actually tracked, 6 countries had extreme trust losses, but some actually had extreme trust gains. And guess which country is on the top? China. Like, I mean, bunch of actually questions come to your mind is like, you trust Chinese government? Because that has been, they've gained major trust as US has been experiencing decline. More and more trust actually was built into the Chinese government. And then how they drive change, how they drive opportunity, how they drive everything, which is really interesting. But also, if you look at the mixed bag of countries, it's like a very odd, like, they're not good bedfellows, right? Because you have ideologically a communist country to an authoritarian regime to a dictatorship all in the same, and then democratic country as well. But most important here is, in the US, it's on the ultimate decline. So essentially, we're seeing the shifts that's happening between centralized, because to a large degree, everything operates from a centralized model. Whether it's a company, government, decision-making is top-down, and then it's got layers of filters. But now what we're beginning to see is decentralization slowly kicking in. I think this decentralization is not a new idea. It's been around since humans have existed. But what's really important here is, through algorithms, through a program, we're able to drive decentralization, which wasn't possible before. Distributed is another one, because peer-to-peer, peer-to-peer. So the only trust we seem to be getting these days is, if my friend recommends it, I'll take it. If someone actually references me, I'll take it. So you're depending on your personal networks, which is a peer-to-peer network, to execute whether it's a deal, or a company you're going to build in, or the investment that you're going to make, or the talent that you're going to hire, or the building that you're going to sign off on as an opportunity. It doesn't matter. But it looks like a pure influence is far greater than any singular entity. This is actually important in the context of no one is in charge, is because in the peer network, who is in charge? Like, if something goes wrong, who do you blame? How does that work? But is it just that peer network through a blockchain kind of a mechanism, which actually allows, through programmatic framework, to connect different entities to actually drive a certain value, whether the value is a consumer side of it, whether it's a return on investment for an investor, or a product that a company is going to make and sell. But in that equation, what is the other layer which is actually important that's also driving this peer network is automation. Automation is driven by algorithms, right? Again, I've already played this one, the Raker as well, but I want to play this other very interesting song, and then I'm going to like breeze through some slides very quickly.
Turns me on. Good day, sunshine in the backseat. God, I wish that road could never stop. Down on the ground.
What kind of genre comes to your mind when you listen to that song? Any guesses? I see Beatles, because I was just a huge fan of Beatles. But more important than this has not been created by a human. The entire album was created by artificial intelligence, machine learning algorithms, from scratch. So the creation of what we consider to be very good at as humans, as artists, is actually done by a machine. So the question is, in this case, who do we call as the artist? One algorithm, multiple algorithms, or pure algorithms that actually came together and actually created this beautiful music? And this is not only one. There are several examples of the amount of music that has already been created by machines. So the question is either we create it, or they create it for us, or we work with the machines to actually create some whole new genre of music. It's important. Again, it goes back to breaking down one being in charge and then actually driving through a set of algorithms and basic frameworks. So kind of going back to this, that's why it's actually really important is when you think about all of these areas that humans tout to be the best creators, but forget about the business side. I know all of this leads to business because this is big business. This is multi-billion dollar business, is the entertainment industry. And it hires thousands and thousands and millions of employees everywhere. And the royalties are collected, and then actually content is getting created. Every single one, there are enough examples to show that it was not a human's involvement, but actually a machine has envisioned from scratch, built something which is very palatable for us to consume. Not just a scratching sound, it's actually really, really interesting. So essentially what we're talking about here is AI is in the creation mode alongside humans right now. It is not that us versus them. I think there's this tandem ride, like going off the cliff when you do a hang glide, or actually taking off on a parachute. If you're not trained, you want a tandem, right? Because that's the safest way to actually do it. But it's already happening. So the battle is really not about is the technology or is the human driving it. It doesn't matter. But can the ultimate decision, if I partner with a machine, has the best outcome? And I think right now, our outcome and purpose is still being defined by humans, because we're still doing things based on what is in the best interest of the company, the industry, or the opportunity. Again, I don't know if anyone actually followed Google's DeepMind, the AlphaGo game. I think it's like one of the goosebump moments where robots actually got 60 and humans got 0. And this is the best human talent in the entire world. 5 games, hands down, 1 game was won by human, or actually almost none. So it's a coexistence. So when you say no one is in charge, like again, I want to like hone in on this point of why do we even say like no one is in charge? It's not about one being in charge anymore. It's a team, a peer that's actually becoming more and more working together and actually driving the results that are required. Integrated. If you actually see here, we have a bunch of like different vehicles, essentially from air to land to little mini cabs. In all of this, when people see the hardware, I also see software actually driving it. I know UPS actually is a great example here locally where it's already been testing several miles on autonomous trucks. They've already deployed and have been actually proving that, including a drone delivery mechanism for the ultimate last mile delivery. It's fascinating that UPS is actually on the forefront of this, trying to actually drive that. But again, what does it mean for logistics? What does it mean for supply chain? What does it actually really mean for real estate industry as a whole? Integration is the only way. Hardware is something static, has no purpose anymore. But this, with some intelligence, actually can drive a much bigger purpose. And when that is connected with each other, that's a whole other world. This is another set of things where we see evolution, and the evolution is happening so fast that how is this connection and the fluidity being built? Like we see everything as silos, and we see everything as these independent zones where we have control, and we can deploy control, manipulate the outcome based on the benefit of all the stakeholders. But in a connected environments, you have edge devices, you have connected objects, and then whether you take drones in that case, I'm sure you've seen a demonstration yesterday, which is a beautiful, beautiful display of drones and how that can actually work. And then, of course, 3D printing. I don't know if you've had a chance, if other speakers spoke about that, but I'm going to give you an example later. Industrial AR, VR, augmented reality and virtual reality, these are not like yesterday's possibilities. Today is actually the reality of today. We are dealing with every single one of those in multiple industries. Like, tech industry is, of course, filled with a lot of this, but when I look at entertainment, entertainment is driving a lot on the AR, VR side. Movies are getting made, screenplays are being written, teams are actually coming together to collaborate on a particular project through augmented and virtual reality. But now if you add that AR, VR that has been driven by a robot, that's a whole other world we're talking about. So of course you have wearables, with a lot of sensors going to it, and then you have robotic systems. Robot is not just something that actually talks nice, it's like not only a humanoid, but there are many industrial robotic systems. We've been using that for a long time in warehouse settings anyway, but now they're getting so advanced that now I can connect that industrial robot that can actually talk to the humans involved and probably even help them make certain decisions along the way. Sensors and connectivity. So in the IoT, I'm sure you've all heard of these terms and acronyms and probably involved in some capacity, but you have industrial Internet of Things, but I actually call it Internet of Everything. As long as there's connectivity for me to connect to the cloud, I can possibly build some basic intelligence into this wooden, podium or actually a chair or even like something, and then make them talk to each other. So what does that connectivity really even mean? And in that connectivity zone, when you put the spotlight back on the real estate or the built or construction environment, what does connectivity can lead to for the developer, for the builder, for the contractors actually working on that, or the construction worker? How can they leverage some of these which have the potential to really not just help one's own work, but most importantly, it can amplify your gains at the end of the day. So if it's going to have a bottom line positive net, so why wouldn't one consider incorporating some of these technologies? So sensors and monitoring, satellite monitoring. Right now, we're actually looking at what is a really great real estate zone to invest in, not based on some industry analyst putting a report together. I'm actually turning to NASA and say, give me the data on that particular piece of land. Let me look at the heat waves. Let me understand what is the soil composition, whether I can do agriculture on that piece of land or not. I no longer have to rely on this siloed vertical experts whose input is extremely important, but they don't have the data that a space agency possibly can have. Because they're tracking 24/7. Telecommunications today actually have more data on everything that's happening on actually a physical level than most people can actually envision. Another company I know, weather.com, is a local company. Their data is just brilliant because they understand patterns. They know impact of what's going to happen to what zone way before because they're doing risk mitigation. Insurance companies actually have better data on real estate than real estate industry themselves. So this whole cross-pollination of cross-industries coming together and looking at, hey, you're in that business, but I have better data. I can also get into that business. So the barrier of entry for anybody to enter any industry is actually getting minimized by the day because it's the information and how you understand the information and then how do you apply some intelligence to that to predict and say, can I do this investment? Can I build this building here? Would it have the same outcome here? And how do I build it? And if I build it, who's going to buy it? Can I pre-plan that so I have zero inventory in the process? Those are all really, really, really critical questions if you look at the entire supply chain of anything that ever gets built, now and in the future. Of course, applied sensor networks, of course, we look at this heavy industries like agriculture, oil and gas, fleet, smart grids, factory, warehouses. Amazon is probably one of the best warehouses in the world because maybe less than 10% are humans actually involved in everything end-to-end when it comes to warehouses. Whole packaging, monitoring, sorting, everything is done through robots. So more and more, these industrial environments are turning into robotic factories because they're far more accurate. They don't have to take a leave when they're sick, and they can operate 24/7. And I don't need to have like about 50 people to manage that. I can shrink it down to 2, who are probably one is a roboticist, other one is a data scientist. In combination with, of course, some expertise, domain expertise that goes into it. But if you think about the morphing of the physical zones the way we know it, whether it's a commercial building, a hotel building, or a residential building, or building a highway or a bridge, or maintaining a road by DOT, the agency, how is the whole supply chain and who's involved in the supply chain? How is it actually being managed from every point, start to finish? Is there architects involved? Are there designers involved? Are there actually contractors involved? And are there material suppliers involved? And actually the builders are involved. But all of this is getting funded by a pool of investors who care about their bottom line. So how can a developer today plan a development that may possibly happen 10 years from now? Can I predict that way in advance? So that way I never have to lose money. I don't have to depend on the stroke of chance to say, oh, I think it's, that's a good place. Hopefully we'll sell all the units. Or maybe I can have this hotel being built without actually no downside to my investment. So in all of that, we have to start looking at the whole industry as one large supply chain process and looking at all the different entities who are going to be part of that. So again, UN has actually done a survey which is really interesting because when you look at real estate industry and aggregate, has a big impact on carbon emissions. About 40% of the total energy consumption and emissions is driven by the real estate industry. Again, earlier we were not tracking, but that's a really big deal, especially the fact that we're talking about climate crisis. Oceans are rising. The property along all the coast will be wiped out. So there'll be literally mass migrations happening inland because people are going to move away from earthquake zones, volcanic zones, and also definitely right now sea level rise and floods and hurricanes. So we're going to see mass movements of actually people, humans, moving elsewhere. So that means there's a golden opportunity, if one is a builder, to start looking at new developments everywhere for this massive change that can also possibly have an impact in not contributing towards this number. So the how do you build matters. So working with robots. Have you ever thought about what does a robot even mean, working with them? So there was actually a proof of concept that was actually built in Switzerland. Switzerland has some of the highest codes of construction because they very, very tightly monitor everything that goes into the construction. And they created this concept called DFAB house. It's actually celebrated right now as the first habitable building completely designed, planned through digital fabrication methods. So digital fabrication could be 3D printing, adaptive technology. There's a whole range in between 3D printing to the adaptive side of it, but also using artificial intelligence, AR, VR in the process. So that's only part of what they actually built. But again, it's not built. We have to redefine what built means. Print. That was printed using that same mechanism. So is building moving towards printing? What does it really mean? Would we be able to print everything, or can we use part of the technology to print some parts of the building that I'm going to be making, right? So it was developed by a student team at a university. These are not experienced builders. There are 30 industry partners, of course, who provided that domain expertise and then brought them to that over the course of 4 years. That's how it actually looks, which is fantastic. It has 3D printed ceilings, energy efficient walls, timber beams, but they were all assembled by robots on site. And everything was built with intelligent system. There's smart home connectivity already goes into every layer of printing that you're doing. So that means the house can talk to your car without you telling them how to talk to a car or using Alexa as a medium. So the materials itself have become more smarter. And actually went through all the stringent building safety codes of Switzerland government. So that means you are in compliant with what government wants you to do, how you want to do it, but the mechanism and how you built is actually very different. That's your human construction worker for this building. 2 giant robotic arms just printing one layer at a time. So your construction site possibly can look like this. I'm sure you've already seen it, but I'm just re-emphasizing that point, is if you think about a construction zone going into tomorrow, what does it look like? And if you're a technologist, an entrepreneur, how do you want to build interesting products or solutions for, say, the real estate industry? So it doesn't matter which side of the equation one is coming from, what does it really mean? I'm sure everybody knows about the Tesla, Elon Musk solar cells. But if you look at the roof, that entire roof is one giant solar invisible cell. That means I don't have to depend on another grid for energy utilization. So possibly what this house can become is I'll become your next energy producer as that single house. Because how much energy could a house possibly use? What is your extra energy that you've actually produced? You can probably trade it off and sell it. Or connect through a peer network, whether a blockchain mechanism or an AI system, and then just have the entire neighborhood basically sell to each other. So you no longer need extra source of energy when your direct source is the sun. So autonomous vehicles has actually began this conversation called smart highways. I don't know how many of you are familiar with smart highways. We're right now looking at, forget about this one building, forget about this one room. We're talking about the entire stretches of highways that we drive on to actually become completely smart. So in the future, the moment I leave my home, get into my electric or whatever option of a car that I would have, that's going to connect directly with the road I'm actually traveling on, powering, but also talking to say that, hey, your tire pressure is low. I don't need to even do that. And that information is now actually going to probably your government. In the China case, of course, that's always a high possibility. But there are many, many projects around the world that are actually in pilot. Some have failed, which is supposed to, by the way. I think, but where the experimentation is so much right now, I think it's going to lead to some really, really fascinating results. So Netherlands has something called a solar road project, where actually your road starts generating now energy. And actually in the US, an Idaho-based solar roadways built a 14-square-meter roadway, which is doing exactly the same thing. So that means your very road that you're actually building is now solar panel and electric grid. So it's not concrete and cement. So that means the material that you can actually use right now are smart materials, not your regular static concrete that actually has no intelligence, cannot tell you whether it's actually breaking apart or not, and there's no way to fix it. But actually, I just learned about this. Apparently, there's actually a project in Georgia here is also doing the same thing, which I thought was like really amazing, right? 30 kilometers off of I-85 near Troup County, which I'm really curious to go check it out, is they're also testing with this smart highway concept. So all of this has implications to real estate as a broad industry. That means who would you hire to build anything in the future? Would you hire a construction worker who knows how to lay bricks, or would you actually hire a data scientist who would tell you how to lay and then print through a digital mechanism? But I think China is really, really, as a country, very uniquely positioned to probably drive a lot of this, primarily because they have phenomenal infrastructure expertise, because they built, I think in last year or a year before, a 57-story skyscraper in 19 days, because it was all prefab approach. So it's not like end-to-end, it actually took only 19 days, but several parts were built separately through robotic and adaptive and 3D printing and other mechanisms, were literally assembled like Lego pieces. It's a skyscraper. 57 is a pretty large building. Imagine if in the US, if you were to build a skyscraper, the budget plus also how long would it take for us to build a skyscraper? Of course, we stopped building a lot of skyscrapers recently, but that's a massive, massive, massive project. And they built a railway station in 9 hours. So by the time we're done with this session, they put up a railway station. Like, what the heck does it mean? Like, how could we fathom that if that already exists, already being done? It is not like a fancy Jetson scenario. It is the current reality of construction is happening. So what does it mean here for us in the US, and in general for the industry? What direction is it going? How would you actually do this? Again, this is not linear, it's exponential. This is how exponential projects have to come about. I'm just going to skip all of this because I've already talked about this. But the two things that I actually want to leave here is no matter what you build, how you build, what is touch, like whatever you do, two factors go into your entire decision making. Who do you trust? Who do you work with? What do you invest in? What do you build? What's the opportunity is? But the most important question is who? The identity. Is the identity a human you would depend on or a machine that you would trust? Or is it actually a combination of both? So no one is in charge means we are all in charge. It is not like there's nothing else. But powered, our new plumbing has changed. Our plumbing is no longer this you tell me, I tell you, we have like 10 layers of validation that actually has no accuracy at all because it's never been measured, versus you have this single layer of peer-to-peer connectivity. And blockchain is a very, very fascinating technology that can allow programmatically to some degree. But then most importantly is automation driven by intelligence. What if I had the right information at the right time, I can predict, would I make the same decision or the same investment or build the same thing the same way? So intelligence is critical. So AI is critical. Machine learning is critical. Anyone rich with data actually has a huge advantage even with the best industry player. So real estate has a lot of interesting data, but how do you utilize that data? I'm sure a lot of great speakers have come here, given you examples, but I have a list of endless examples I'm happy to share with you offline. But you have to start looking at that. I'm going to quickly go to this one chart that will give you the number of companies already trying to. So these are the smarter cities. And these are all like out there. These are public information. Parking, disaster management, smart transport, you name it. Remember, all of this deals with real estate, physical real estate. Someone owns it, someone controls it, someone's taking advantage of it into a monetary opportunity, but multiple players are benefiting from this. Because whether any physical space is actually real estate. So that's another map of the number of companies working in various areas of construction tech. So you have data and analytics, building project and information, collaborative softwares. This one is even more exhaustive. Frontier, robotics. I mean, yes, they're not at that stage where you can 100% rely on that, but not utilizing is not even an option on the table. So one can choose to say, do I want to utilize every single tool in my toolkit to make my bottom line better, but also make the bottom line better for all the stakeholders, and have better opportunity to actually build better things faster, cheaper, better, so investors are happy in the end. But if I don't want, if I want to resist all of this that's actually coming, I think it's pointless. Because if we can build a railway station in 9 hours, what prevents us from saying that they won't be here tomorrow in our backyard giving us competition? Highly possible. It may not be China, maybe India, may not be India, maybe actually Bahamas. Even though it's underwater right now, what's going to come later right now is like a brand new opportunity for them to rethink construction from scratch. And there are already some interesting people having conversations to say, how do we turn islands into floating cities? And I have a couple of my friends who are working on a floating city model where, hey, if there's going to be hurricanes, no big deal. I'm actually going to be floating around in the world. And I'm going to have everything I would have in a city. But it's going to have different methods and means and how you build it. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer, and I'm going to share some more links for you to read about. But really, thank you for the opportunity, and I look forward to speaking to you soon.